the people and government of Bolivia has taken the decision to break diplomatic ties from today with the State of Israel.
That was the Bolivian ambassador to the United Nations at UN headquarters in New York on Wednesday, announcing that his country was severing diplomatic ties with Israel.
Because we consider it a state that does not respect life of peoples, international law or international humanitarian law.
For more on that, we go to Nicaragua to speak with two journalists based in the region, Stephen Sefton and Camila Escalante. Camila, why don't you first fill us in about exactly what's going on with Bolivia and this, and then you guys maybe give a little analysis, lay of the land of the region there as they look towards what's happening around Gaza.
Well, we've been waiting all of this time to hear if any countries will stop with the empty letters of repudiation against Israel for its genocide, for the atrocities and violence that it's committing against the people of Gaza and Palestinians in general. And finally, yesterday, the Foreign Ministry of Bolivia came out and officially stated that they are formally cutting ties with the State of Israel, effective immediately, that they had communicated that with Israel's diplomats there. Of course, it's not a huge win. There certainly people are going to be very inspired and uplifted by this news. But of course, this is a country that for 10 and a half years, since 2009, had already cut relations with Israel because of previous atrocities committed by the Zionists against Gazans during Evo Morales' first term in office. So he decided to cut ties with Israel. He imposed visa requirements that hadn't previously been imposed for Israelis to visit the country. And until the coup, 2019, they had no relations. Of course, Jeanine Áñez, under the dictatorship, brought back those relations. So those were just severed once again, once and for all, yesterday. Then we got news from the governments of Colombia and the governments of Chile that they are recalling, I guess would be the closest word in English, their diplomats that are currently stationed, their ambassadors that are currently stationed in Israel. And of course, this means that they are calling them back to the country and going to give them further instructions. So we don't actually know what this means. It could mean that it's a very firm gesture or warning in the direction of possibly severing ties with Israel. But of course, these countries, particularly, Colombia, but also many other countries of Latin America, have very extensive and deep trade with Israel. So it's not an easy thing for them to break relations if they do that. But what we're seeing right now is a huge gap between the populations of these countries, where in Latin America, so many people are demanding that their governments sever ties with the Zionists for the crimes against humanity, the war crimes, the genocide, the ethnic cleansing they're carrying out, and the governments who have just given some lip service but have not actually converted any of what they've said, any of their statements from the foreign ministry or whatever else, into any concrete actions. But what people are demanding is that these governments immediately sever ties with Israel, because Israel is not a self-sustaining country or state, nor military. They don't have the resources on their own to be committing these crimes and violence and wiping out Palestinians in Gaza. They're receiving funding from these massive trade and cooperation that they maintain primarily with the United States, obviously those NATO countries, but many other countries around the world. And so the very least we can do, and of course the bar is very low, is to cut relations with Israel. And so we're hoping to see more of those announcements in the coming days and weeks.
It seems inevitable to me that it'll become practically impossible for certainly for countries that claim to be progressive in any sense to maintain diplomatic relations with Israel. It'll be particularly difficult for Argentina, which has, I think it's got the largest Jewish population outside Israel itself.
Argentina almost was Israel, actually. Well, Herzl, back, one of the founding members of the Zionist movement, was trying to decide whether to locate the Zionist project in where it is or in Argentina, because there was a land offer.
Right. Prior to the Balfour Declaration, there was even a plan to suggest to the Zionists that they settle in Africa. But anyway, I'm going back to Latin America. I'd be very very surprised if countries like Nicaragua and Honduras, for example, don't follow the example of Bolivia. And the four main ALBA countries, Cuba, Venezuela, Bolivia, and Nicaragua, cut their relations with Israel, as Camila mentioned, back in 2009, 2010, following the caste-led genocidal operation by Israel against Gaza at that time. And only Nicaragua re-established relations in 2017 for reasons that I don't quite understand, but they did. But Nicaragua is one of the few countries, along with Cuba, Venezuela, and surprisingly countries like Uruguay and even Chile, that maintain ambassadorial relations with the state of Palestine. Who knows how things will pan out in terms of what individual countries decide to do. But I think Camilla's right in saying that there's incredibly strong pressure on practically all the governments in Latin America to cut their relations with Israel, faced with the unforgivable genocide that's taking place in Gaza, with the full support, apparently, of the United States and a great deal of support from the European Union.
Yeah, just the way the whole war there is developing. The implications for that region where you guys are and for all of us, are pretty large, given the possibility of either a major interruption in oil markets, which would drive mad global inflation, basically, for food supply, energy, all of the things that that are subsequent down the food chain, so to speak, from oil prices, and also, of course, the prospect of a global war. Are people talking about this in the media, but also just on the street around where you are?
Camila?
Well, I think people are beginning to speak about that. And of course, there is the cue, for Brazil. Brazil is currently this month the president of the UN Security Council. Everyone is very disappointed around the world that the UN Security Council failed to reach any sort of a resolution on Gaza and Israel, despite that the UN General Assembly was able to. But of course, there's really obvious reasons why. We have some permanent members that are vetoing each other and will always do so. But we have Brazil trying to sneak in and grab a permanent spot on the Security Council in the future. So many people right now in the global South and in Latin America in particular are looking to Brazil for some sort of leadership. This is a country in which the MST, the Landless Workers Movement, has actually sent humanitarian aid to Gaza themselves as a social movement this past week, and where so many of Lula's base supporters have very, progressive positions when it comes to Gaza, and they have denounced the genocide that's taking place. Actually, a lot of people around South America have some sort of a tie. Obviously, the Palestinian population that is so large in Chile, for example, many people have gone in brigades. They've visited Gaza. They've seen the situation firsthand for themselves, but we're waiting for our leadership to make some sort of move. But I do think it always comes back to the same context that we've spoken about before, which is that as all of this is happening and all of these things are taking place overseas, the United States and Southcom continues to encroach on South America, on Latin America, and the Caribbean, installing its vessels, installing all of its military equipment, continuing to, at the same time as countries like Israel maintain that security cooperation, Israel and Colombia. And also there's the relationship between Israel and Mexico. And so these are things that, our governments have to be very wary of and very, very careful with. But I think it's not inconceivable to me that some sort of conflict could extend to Latin America and the Caribbean. And in fact, the Southcom general or commander Laura Richardson is one among many, including many people of the Republican Party, who are accusing Latin America and Latin American governments of harboring so-called, members of Hezbollah in their countries. They're specifically making those claims with regards to Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua right now. So it's really frightening to think about what they're going to try to achieve with those sorts of claims that they're making.
That's scary, isn't it? It sounds like they're trying to enable an action. Well, we're out of time. I'd like to thank both of you. And obviously, we'll be watching this because the implications are pretty frightening. Thank you both.
Thank you, Don.
Thank you, Don and Stephen.
For KPFK, I'm Don DeBar.